What's up, everybody? It's Mason here from Comics and Crosses, and today we have a special House of Nerd Comics and Crosses, House of Comics and Crossovers crossover. It is Lauren, the Friendly Neighborhood Bi, is here with me. Say what's up, Lauren.
What's up, everyone?
And especially, we got a special guest, Sean Lewis, writer of Bliss, of Coyotes, of Spawn, of Superman, of a great many things. So what's up, Sean? Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really fun. I love that this is a crossover event.
It is, yeah, because Mason does the Comics and Crosses channel, and I'm on the House of Nerd channel. So this is our first crossover. You're making it happen.
I love it. This is great.
Yeah, and this was, but to tell everybody out here, so obviously we're here promoting Bliss. The trade paperback is out now, and this brought me and Lauren together because we were just on Twitter like, oh man, I love this. As it was coming to its conclusion, we were like, oh, we have to talk about this more. So yeah, Bliss is a story that that I have loved, that I feel like Sean, I feel like has been one that's just, close to your heart, that really connects to you as a person. Do you want to share a bit about the idea and how it came about?
Sure. Yeah. It's kind of funny. It absolutely is probably, it's at this point the most personal book that I've written, and it was not planned that way. It was not supposed to be a very personal book. Honestly, when me and Kate first started talking about it, we had just finished this other book, Coyotes, and we really enjoyed working with each other. That book was like a 3-year process. Wow. And then we were like, we should do another book together. We want to. And we started throwing around ideas, and we just weren't hitting on anything. Kate does a lot of travel when she draws. She'll just go to Thailand and send me pictures that make me envious.
Wow.
And so we started playing with this international idea, and people going who don't have health care to different countries. And then that didn't work out. We couldn't figure that out. And then just the way politics and everything else in the country were running, and our own personal issues, we had one day on Twitter, we were not talking about comics, and we were just yeah, how do people do bad things and just get up in the morning and live with themselves? And then I think we both just had an aha moment. We were in direct message, and we were both wait. We're just going back and forth. And then we're like, well, what would that be as a book? And then at that point I started going well, I'm a big myth geek. And so I was like, well, that would be cool. I could get into Oblivion and the idea of the goddess Leth, and there's some really great things with the river, and gets into a lot of things I'm interested in. And then I was just like, what do you want to draw? And she was like, I want to draw turtles. I was like, okay. Sure.
Sure, whatever.
I think part of our partnership, what's really good is it's just constantly yes. So the moment she said, I was like, okay, I'll
turtles it is.
I'll figure out what that means.
That's cool.
Actually, yeah, it became fun. So then I for people who haven't read the book, there's a bunch of I call them mob gods. They're low-level criminals, but gods, demigods, and they're all these amphibian creatures, turtles and frogs, and and they're really fun. They're very Neil Gaiman and Dark Crystal-y, which is very much huge influences on Kate. And then we got into writing it. And I started thinking of the basic story, and I knew I wanted to start in a courtroom, and a child defending their dad. I think it was halfway through writing the issue, and definitely when I saw the art for the first issue, that I was like, I think that's me in court.
Dang.
Yeah.
Wow. So it was, it kind of snuck up on you that more was coming out of you than you anticipated, you would say?
Yeah. I think all the books I've written, especially everything I've done at Image and creator owned, has been really personal. I feel like I have to have some kind of personal connection to the things I'm writing in order to make the story really full, and have a connection to it. But this was one where there's always a level of hiding, the ways you can hide within a story, or sometimes who I am in the story is a third like a tertiary character who's just watching things, and I'm like, yeah, I saw stuff like this happen, but no one knows that because I'm actually the guy in the background on page 5. Where this was one, as the deeper we got into it, the more I was like, oh man, this is a lot of my dad, this is a lot of my mom, this is a lot of me, you know. And then it became this kind of wrestling match back and forth. And I have a young son, and like the initial thing that I thought was going to be the personal connection was just this idea of how to make my son understand right and wrong, and how to make him, you know, understand these ideas of forgiveness, which is a really huge thing I'm interested in. Forgiveness and retribution are things that I'm really intrigued by in everything I do. And so it started with me thinking like, well, I'm kind of write a little allegory for Eamon, for my son. And then, yeah, it just kind of, with each issue, it became much more where I was like, by issue 3, I just knew, I was like, this is no longer like a fake story.
It sounds like you just kind of like personally attacked yourself as you kept writing, and you didn't realize it till it was done. And in a way, you know, reading all the issues and especially that coda at the end, like I was just like, this seems like it was like therapy to you in a way, you know, like just processing all these things that were kind of in the back of your mind about life and about even yourself.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, my dad passed away when I was in grad school, and we weren't really close. And there were stories I had from my experiences with him, but also when he passed, it was this really fascinating thing, because it was like, first of all, I think as you become an adult, more people in your circle feel more comfortable telling you things that you might not want to know. So like there would be times before he passed away where my mom would tell me a story that I didn't know about him that would put him in a completely new and often not good light. And then when he passed away, it was fascinating. You know, I was in grad school in Iowa, and he died in Denver, and I drove out to the funeral, and it was just this really weird event. I hadn't been to a funeral like this before. They kind of opened up the pulpit and were like, anybody who wants to say something about him can come up and say something. And what was interesting is all these people, my experience with him had been bad. So what was interesting is like all these people kept getting up there, and they would be like, he was the kindest, most gentle person I ever met. And another person would get up and they're like, when me and my daughter, I remember specifically when me and my daughter were homeless, he bought us a car and rented us an apartment for a year. And I had these conflicting emotions, because I was like, he did not do that for me. And so there was a little bit of envy. There was definitely a lot of envy and anger. But I think as I get older, there's also a level of fascination of like, that is actually it's a really kind action. Like, it's definitely a part of him I did not know.
Yeah.
Like that, there was definitely things from that I had not processed. And I think when I think the moment you become a parent, at least as a dad of a little boy who also looks a lot like me, there's so often that I'm looking at him and going like, how do I not be Rick? There's also other moments I see him and I'm like, I literally see myself. It's almost like a weird flashback like, I'm literally watching myself right now have the same reaction. Like Eamon got in trouble earlier today for something stupid. Like he was throwing water at a wall, and I was like, we don't throw water at the wall. And he was like, I know. And he went like in the room. He was being so hard on himself. And I went in and I was talking to him, and he was like, I'm bad. And the weird thing for me though is I was also looking at him, and my wife too, and she was like, this is you. Like when you think you've done something wrong, you attack yourself for like to an insane degree. So yeah, I do think that's a long way around to saying like, I think the book, if not therapy, was definitely a new, which I guess therapy is, a new level of vulnerability, of kind of asking questions of myself that I might not do in an everyday basis.
Well, so for my channel, I like to really dig into comics and talk about just kind of what it is that draws us to them, the kind of human elements, even religious elements, spiritual elements, all kinds of things. And so for anybody listening, I mean, just in our opening few minutes here, you can see how dense and how like deep this story gets. But I probably should have done this at the start. But Sean, do you want to just give us the synopsis? So if somebody's never heard this story, tell us where's all this deep craziness encased in? What is this story? Give us the rundown.
I'll try and do it in the most simple way as possible, because I actually think elevator pitches of the book make people not want to buy the book.
Yeah, I think we went reverse.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to try to encapsulate, and I think when people are like, "Oh, that sounds complicated," it can chase you away. I mean, at its most basic, there's a city that has gotten hold of a drug called Bliss that makes your bad memories go away. So anything bad you've done to someone, you no longer remember, so you can go about your day as normal. And our main character, Benton, his son is sick, so he becomes an enforcer for the people who are getting the drug around town, which brings up huge issues. He's not a bad man, but he does a lot of bad things. So the rest of the book is kind of this bouncing back and forth in time between him doing those things and how he lives with it, but also how his son lives with the fact of knowing that his dad was a monster to so many people and that he did it out of love for him. That I would say is like the real crux of it is Perry trying to reconcile having a monster as a father who did horrible things solely so he could live.
I think that's a good pitch, honestly, because I mean it encapsulates what the book is truly about, which is it's a book about how family can be complicated. It's a book about how you can be a good person and still do terrible things, and how does that make sense in life. So it gives you all these really big questions so even if you're like, well, why are there turtle amphibian things and what is this river and what is this thing flying,
right?
Everybody can still identify with every other theme of the book, so you start thinking this fantasy world is real. And I love the fact that you have a drug called Bliss, and you named it Bliss very specifically. It seems like because you get the bliss of you can do bad things and basically forget it, so you don't feel guilt. And I think this also examines what guilt is like and why we need guilt in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Guilt is a major part of my life.
For everybody,
I was gonna say, for a lot of people, guilt is, especially people that are heavily religious, things like that. Yeah,
I think it's an interesting thing too, because I don't think I realize there's just so many things in our lives that we think are our own. That it's like, oh, I'm the only person who deals with or struggles with this. And the therapy side of this it was interesting writing Issues of Bliss and having so many people say, like, I wrestle with the same feelings as this character. I was like, oh shit, it's not just me.
Yeah.
It's validation. Yeah.
You were killing us softly, Sean. You with your comic.
So what was that like with the fan interactions? Because it was a limited series, and it was a book that I don't think was the most heavily marketed, right? It's not Spawn or anything, but what was it like getting the fan reactions after those first few issues started coming out?
It was huge for multiple reasons. One was we actually had a good amount of marketing behind us in the beginning, but then COVID hit and we got pushed 4 to 5 months ahead, and all our marketing push had already happened. So we were stuck in this thing where 5 months ago there was this major read Bliss is going to be great, and then COVID hit and that's not there anymore. So it really did become a very word of mouth book in this. And our opening, I'll be honest, coming off Coyotes, our expectations, Coyotes had done pretty well, and when Coyotes wrapped up, its trade had gotten a lot of attention. So Kate and I were both thinking we're just going to build off of this. And it was hard. Our initial, they do some tracking. And before COVID hit, our numbers looked amazing. We were like, it's going to work. We're going to build off of this. This will get a lot of attention. And those numbers just declined heavily once everything got pushed. So our initial launch was pretty low. And we were both like, oh shit, I really love this book. And it's we were also like, this is a weird, it can be a weird book from the outset.
To say it is, we're talking about all these different ideas already, and something I wanted to mention is if you look at any other book out there that you're going to pick up, it's you maybe got one really fascinating idea that the story's hanging their hat on. And if you look at Bliss, it's there's this drug that makes you forget your memories. There's this father-son dynamic. There's these amphibians. There was like so many like unique things that make you stop and think. He does it all for the sake of his son. Like so many themes in there that like, and that's what attracted me to, is like, man, I could really talk about this for a long time.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot. I mean, Kate and I, like I said, we say yes to each other constantly. Like we challenge each other when we don't understand a thing. Like Kate will be great. I'll give her a script and she'll be like, I don't know what the hell is happening page 6 through 10. And I'm like, a lot of times she's right, is I'll be like, me neither. Back and look at this. But we both have like big obsessions with myth, which they themselves are super complicated. You know, like, you know, like Zeus is like, I'm big on Greek. So like, you know, Zeus is like horrendous, but also is the whole reason like the world of Greece like survives and lives, and like, you know, it's this constant like battle of like, well, he's this like rapist dove who also destroys the Titans. Like, how do we rectify this entity? So I feel like once you get into like myth, which then gets you into allegory, there's a lot of places you can go, and that just ends up being more exciting to me. I don't know why. It's a lot of work, but it definitely is interesting to me to see like how dynamic. I guess sorry, I'm not being super articulate. Add on a podcast.
No, it's okay. I mean, you're passionate about this. Like this is your baby, it seems like. So
I think comics in general have been that for me. You know, I've worked in a lot of different mediums, and there's something about the form that's super fascinating to me because it's incredibly primitive, right? It's like the most primitive thing I can imagine. We all did it in grade school, right? Like we all drew pictures and put words to them, and like cavemen did it. It's so basic and simple, but it also allows you to kind of go anywhere as long as you can lead the reader along in a way that I think that most other medium, like it gets equated to film the most. But I'm like, it's actually not like movies. I don't think I could write a screenplay of Bliss. Like it jumps around in time. It has like it has the mob gods who are like these like weird monster gods. It's got this heartfelt story at the center of it. It shifts like visual tones that I think like I at least have not seen a movie that does stuff like that. And a lot of my favorite comics are like that. Like I think of Saga. I love Saga. And like, for the same reasons where I'm like, I don't know how you make a movie of this. Like, it's so insane, like on so many levels. Like there's porn on the Admiral's like television set, fly around in a tree with a disembodied ghost. Like if I pitched that to anybody, they'd be like, this sounds horrible. Like,
that's what television is for though, Sean. Television's where all the chaos happens, where things are out of order, where you have to go through 5 episodes to know what in the world is happening ever. I think you could do it. I think you should do a show with the mob gods and the amphibians.
It's true.
We'll promote it.
You definitely can't do a TV, but I think the long way around to it is that I think the complexity is very much. I think the comic book form can get pushed in so many directions that like. I guess I'm just interested in seeing how far you can go before you completely fall on your face. I mean, I think that's how I approach almost every comic I do. Is like until I think it might fail horribly, I'm not that excited to do it. Which is not the best way to work, but it is very much how I've approached most of them. Is like it's not.
You're not the only person I know that thinks like that. And I think it's common. I think that's common with creatives. Like there's a lot of people I know, like friends and family and such, that if they're really craving their artist, that's a challenge for them. It's like, oh, if I know I'll succeed with this, I don't want to do it. I'm like, but you know you'll succeed. And they're like, but that's not challenging.
Yeah, I don't. It's a very professionally self-destructive approach.
But it's creatively explorative. It's kind of like with improv, you know, you say yes, and like if somebody offers you an idea, you go with it, and then you add on to it.
That's what Sean and Caitlin do. They do the improv yes thing.
The yes.
You say yes until it gets too far, and then you have to stop it because you're like, whoa.
Yes, that's 100%. there's 100% to that, because you just end up with that idea. I feel like you just end up building. I think it also gives both creators. A lot of people ask me about, like, how do you approach making especially people who want to make comics. I think the biggest thing it does is it gives ownership to both parties. There's always these arguments about, like, who's more important in a comic book. And I'm like, the best comic books, both of those people have full ownership of the book. Like, you can tell.
Right.
Yeah. You know, like, it feels seamless. It feels like it really was made by one person, but it was definitively two or more people. That's why that conversation, I'm always like, I think maybe you're making books wrong if this is the big fight you're having. Like, where, like, if Caitlin has an idea and we say yes, then, like, she has as much ownership of the book as I do. Like, in terms of us being able to, like, give ideas back and forth and edit each other and both know that we're just working towards the best version of the book.
Yeah. You know? You might equate it to, like, a director working with the right DP, you know, director of photography, to where the cinematography and the storytelling, you know, I mean, that's a very, I come from filmmaking a bit, and that's a very collaborative art form. And I love the collaborative nature of the script and the artist, the illustrator as well in comics. And I will say that I love the art in Bliss, and I know you could really see that there's so much creativity. And like we were saying, it makes you laugh, but it's like, we're going to tell a story about a father doing anything for his son, and he's, you know, working for the mob, and the mob is these weird amphibian demigods, and you know, and because there was, I think
I'm starting to worry all people are going to know about this book is amphibian demigods.
It's so much more, and like towards the end of the story, I remember, you know, where they're going into, you know, the goddess's lair or whatever, and her, like, minions, all these little robed you know, amphibians. And I remember reading and thinking, this is just crazy. Like, you know, like, I'm like, I love this, but this is really weird. Like, but I'm not getting off this ride, but this is kind of weird in the best way.
No, and I love that, you know, because I think, like, it's awesome hearing that, because I feel like the things I love the most, I could say the same thing about. Like, Paul Thomas Anderson movies are fucking strange. Like, he's making big blockbuster, like this big blockbuster film about the 1970s porn industry with major movie stars. That's a weird, like, if you take a step back, you're like, no one does this.
Yeah.
Like, Magnolia is completely insane. Tarantino movies are insane. It's the originality within those worlds that I think make us so attracted to them. And I think what you say about the DP is really true, because there's some great filmmakers who, like, you can see when they change their DP. Like, you can see a difference in the movie where you're like, oh, this doesn't feel the same anymore as what it was. Even more so than screenwriters, you know, like, Scorsese's been working with the same DP basically, like, most of his career, and, like, but different screenwriters, right? So, like, but you see it but you know a Scorsese film when you see a Scorsese film, you know? So I think that's kind of the magic trick I think we're all trying to do, is, like, how do we give you enough theme and enough, like, emotional resonance that your brain goes, I understand where I am. I mean, I don't. Like all this shit's weird, but something is grounding me where I'm like, I know that this is about a father and son who are trying to find the best way to love and forgive each other. That I can just commit to. So all the stuff around it just becomes this excitement, and basically just become obstacles for how they get to that moment. And you start rooting. You're going, like, do I root for them? Do I not root for them? Do I you know?
Yeah. And for those that don't know, so the Kate that keeps getting mentioned by Sean and Mason a couple of times is Caitlin Yarsky. She is the artist on Bliss. And like you said, you guys have worked on the other book together and such. You know, we wanted to get her on the show, but I guess she's super busy, as she should be with her talent. So we barely got you, Sean. You're busy too.
She's deep in Black Hammer Reborn right now with Jeff.
Yeah.
She's doing all the art for that right now.
Oh, so good. Goodness. And, you know, like you said, I think it really does speak that, you know, you can tell this is a creator's book, and it's two creators, and you guys are able to show in your own ways that it's personal to you. Like we talked about the ways it's personal to you. And I'm sure Caitlin, you know, can speak to her own ways that book means the world to her, because especially since you guys had that aha moment, you know. what was it like seeing what this book meant to other people? And did that help Bliss become successful, seeing people? Because I know you said Bliss didn't start out doing well because of COVID and such.
Yeah, I mean, it started out not bad, but probably in what would be a very modest launch. And then right from the get-go, people started kind of talking about it. I think by issue 2 and 3, we started getting a lot. There seemed to be a groundswell happening more on Twitter and online. And the reviews were getting like really flat, like overwhelmingly flattering. Like it was pretty incredible to see people's response to it. And I think, yeah, it just became, it was cool. I mean, for me, it was cool because like just seeing people recommend it to each other, like as people do on Twitter, where it's like, oh, I picked up these 3 books. And like, did you pick up Bliss? Like, nah, I looked at it. It didn't seem like my thing. It's like, pick up Bliss. Yeah. I'd be like, wow, this is cool that people are pushing it. Because I think also when it became so personal that I was like, I don't know if this book's just for me or if it's going to relate. So that for me at least made me go like, oh, just keep going. People are relating, so you can feel comfortable just kind of diving in more and more. But it definitely helped us because we also took like a break in between 4 and 5 that was pretty long. Yeah. We took like a 3-month break, which honestly usually kills a book. And we came back, the audience was still there. And that's when I think we both were like, because we knew when we took the break, we were like, this could be bad.
Yeah.
But once we saw the audience was still there, it became like, oh, wow. And the fact also that even reviewers, it's really hard to keep reviewers on for a run of a book. And I was just amazed that like people just kept reviewing it. And that I think it was seeing the numbers of the fans buying it and the reviews not drop off that both of us started going like, people are really reading this. Which was great. And it definitely made the book kind of not only survive, but it's been cool having so many people talk about the trade. I'm not used to that because usually close to the end of a book that people are like, yeah, you should pick it up. It was fine. I liked it. It usually takes like a year for people to start talking about the trade.
Yeah. And I find, especially on Twitter, a lot of people are, because of budget issues or because, they feel it's better to read things in a trade. People are turning to trades. And honestly, I think that's good in the comic world. I think trades, should be more of a format that people read more consistently in, because then they be produced more. And I think it's great. It's more budget friendly, but you can tell a complete story too. Because not every comic is best in a single issue, month to month, or whatever it is. And yeah, with the Bliss trade paperback, I mean, I'm just excited about it because even though I have all these single issues, it's like it's all in one readable volume. So I can kind of cherish those single issues. And when I do want to reread it, which I do, I have that really, nice, pretty trade paperback or whatever for it.
Yeah. Image also did us a really cool favor. They did a bunch of extra design work on the inside of it that made it really beautiful and read like a book, which was just an awesome move on there. They just were like, the graphic designer at Image was just like, hey, I messed around with your pages. Take a look at it. If you don't like it, we looked at it and we were like, no, do this. This is amazing.
That's nice.
I did it.
I felt like it was a series that I enjoyed every issue. And, some you kind of lose track of the story, but it just was such a, it unfolded so well that you're like, okay, now what happens next? What happens next? But I was excited about the trade as well because I'm like, I can keep a copy that I can just have on my shelf and also that I can share with people. Because, when I'm telling people who don't read comics, well, maybe this might not be the first one, but I would hope I would be like, you should read this story at some point. Maybe if you haven't read comics, it might be a little lost, but it is, something that I'm like, I would love to share this with people. I'd love if they tell me, what's one of your favorite books? Read Bliss,
Right. Yeah, it's one of the great things of the forum, I think, is actually the ease of the trade and being able to share them. Because I feel like everyone I know does that, where it's like you get obsessed with a book. Like, I will pick up another copy of We 3. Like, you should read We 3. We all have those things where it's like, I'm going to pass you this copy of God's Country, like whatever it is.
Yeah, and let me tell you, the ending for Bliss was worth it, despite the break you took in between 4 and 5 and waiting for it. It was one of those things where I told Mason, I think I commented on Twitter as well. The ending was not where I thought it'd go, and I thought it wouldn't please me. I thought I'd be disappointed by it, but your coda actually and helped me see why that was the way it had to end, and why you chose to end it that way, and why it worked. And so the ending of the story didn't make me cry, but your coda actually made me cry in terms of, I was like, wow, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Was the coda always meant to go with the ending? Did you add that last second?
It was late. I think it was around issue 6 is when I told Kate I thought that we would have this coda that was going to be like very autobiographical. Yeah, we were going through a couple of different options for the end of the book. I had a strong feeling that we were going to end the last issue around 15 pages, and that we'd have an extra 5 pages. And we had talked about a couple of different options, and it was in my gut from the moment I started scripting the last issue. For some reason in my gut, I just was like, I guess the book had become so personal at that point that I was like, I don't know how to write this without having this other part of it. And it was also another one of those things where I was like, it could fail miserably. Like, it will either be really powerful and mean a lot to the context of the book, or it'll be a very navel-gazing mess. Like, it's gonna
that's a good risk to take.
Yeah, I mean, I knew it was going to be honest, so that made me feel like it wouldn't fall into the navel-gazing category. And I think it was. It just be. At that point, I started thinking at some point Eamon's going to read this book. Like around 5 or 6, I was like, at some point my son's going to read this comic, and he's going to know at that point that it's about his grandfather and me. And so I was like, I don't know. So I don't know. For some reason at that moment, I was like, I think I'm going to need a note to him, but also to the audience. Because I think also at that point, I knew from conversations with people at shops and people who were reaching out to me that a lot of people were connecting with the book on really like a deeper level than even I expected, where they were saying, or I would see it in reviews, where I would read a review and I'd be like, this review is like a personal essay about something's like really honestly that somebody's been through. And then I was like, I think it has to go to this next level for the book, for me, for Eamon, but also for the audience. It felt right at that point. And yeah, for people who don't know it, the coda ends up being a very personal look at my own experience with my father, but in a way that I think does give context to the past 8 issues that you've read. I mean, I think some of the best things I was happy to see were, there was definitely people who were like, once I read the coda, one of my favorites was just like, someone was like, I loved the book, and then the coda recontextualized it for me in a new way that I did not expect, that made it even richer than the experience had been. And that's
super cool. Yeah, I think that there's I was just gonna like, there's something about father-son stories, or just father stories, because I feel like in general in pop culture and media that we consume, it's like the dad is either a doofus, or like, it's either played for comedy or it's played for like real pain. So to like go in to feel the tension of the middle and to have hope or optimism, because it's like you have to. It's like, whether, I don't think none of us have perfect fathers if we have a father. But if you're a father now, it's like, I have to have optimism here. I have to live with some degree of hope. So I can't tell you an completely bleak story, because it just, for survival, I can't do that. And so I thought it was super compelling. One of my favorite films is Big Fish. I was telling Lauren, by Tim Burton, and just that's just these sometimes. What I'm trying to say is I think that as you were finding and hearing from the fans, that these stories resonate on a really deep level and maybe aren't talked about enough for people to really make sense of what's going on there, within that father relationship. Would you say that you feel like it's working on this piece has resolved anything for you or kind of pushed you to a different phase of being a dad?
Yeah. I think working on the book as a whole, just because it dug up so many, I won't just say bad, but complicated experiences and emotions with my own father, and thinking about like how not to do that with my son. Mm-hmm. It's a tricky thing, you know. I think like a dad and a mom, like parents in general, are this weird entity that we all have. And for a lot of us, not all of us, but like for a lot of us, like one of them or both of them, when you're really little, seems infallible, like a god, right? Like you just look at them as like, you're perfect. And at some point we learn they're not. And that's this really weird, shattering thing. And for many of us, we learn they're really not. Like, yeah. And that's a totally different thing because it shapes us, you know, and some people end up being a lot like their parents because of it. Some become a lot like it despite themselves. Some try and be as far opposite as humanly possible. And I don't know, I think our generation, I think where we're at now, people who are like 50 and under, because right? People are having kids later, like this generation of parents are, I think, in this kind of fascinating gray area where like we're more open and I think aware of the experiences of having parents who were flawed and the flaws of our parents, where I think like most media and most ideas were so much more about like, no, your parents are right and good and they're infallible, and like you come up, you know, it's like the Wonder Years. You're like, it's like, oh, it's the sitcom Mom and Dad, and they're always there for you, and you got to respect that. And a lot of us are like, I didn't have that. like
yeah,
Mom and Dad. So how do I work through this, and how do I not I mean, the big thing for me is just like, how do I not pass this on to my kid?
Yep. Yeah, but you also don't want to do the self-fulfillment prophecy, right? Be like, I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to do, and then you screw yourself over. So, right. Yeah, I think there's always that, you know, you just have to do the best you can. And I liked that as well in the story. That's kind of what it just came down to, is that's all you can do. And that doesn't mean there's going to be a happily ever after, and that doesn't mean everything's going to be the worst ever. It just kind of is sometimes.
Well, I think part of it too is, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, no, it's just, I'm sorry. Like we get on parenting and it's something I think about all the time, but it's also because I think like at its best, but the hardest thing about it, and I think at its best, is trying to have the humility of your own flaws, right? Like, and that's the thing that I think a lot of us grew up without. Like most people I know did not have a parent apologize to them if they did something like bad when they were young, right? Like if you would see your parent yelled at you for no reason, like they had a bad day. Like how many people have that experience? Like they had a bad day at work or with the other, and they turn to the kid and they're just like, shut up, like get out of here. The kid doesn't know what the hell's going on. And most of us probably grew up in the experience where that parent never acknowledged that was not the right thing to do to you, right? It just became part of the day. They probably felt bad about it and they lived with it. But the hard thing with that is like the parent, by not expressing what they did, have also not forgiven themselves for it, right? It becomes this weird secret that we both have to keep, where the parent's going, I did this really shameful thing, and now you're the entity that made me feel ashamed, and now I'm even more angry and have to hide more. And the kid is sitting there going, I guess I did something bad, so I'm ashamed, and I don't know how to express it. And it ends up becoming this like cycle where neither of us really know how to interact and move past it. I mean, I think at the center of Bliss is a lot of people trying to learn how to forgive themselves so they can even start to think about forgiving the person across from them.
Right. Yeah, that's very well said. I think that it was really a really powerful choice, the kind of courtroom setting where things started out, because it really, I mean, like I say, you know, a lot of people can relate to this, and I think for a lot of people that there's sort of an internal courtroom where you're dealing with the issues of your parents. This is kind of what we've been talking about here, and how much do you need to make an explanation for that, make an excuse for it? You know, is it, redirect it, and I mean, that's kind of where we're all living a lot of times, trying to see the best, in our parents or in the situation, and in those whichever traits are kind of taking over our lives. And it was, it seemed like Benton was trying to do good. It was very clear in the beginning how much he loved his son and his wife, and this was a motivation, for everything. Do you think, I mean, would you agree with that? Would you say that a lot of that you're trying to were you trying to show that a lot of how messed up things can get even in trying to do good?
Oh yeah. Yes. I mean, one of my big fascinations, my background's in theater, and a lot of the plays I wrote were completely around how difficult or impossible I think trying to do a purely good action is.
Yeah.
I mean, that just makes me think of the show The Good Place. I don't know if either of you have watched that. Yeah, it's exactly like that, where no matter what you do, it's like the concept of ethical capitalism. There's no such thing if you really get down to it. How can you ever get to the good place if almost everything you do can be attributed to something bad, even if you didn't do it? Somebody else did it that made this thing for you or whatever. And I don't know, like, I really liked what you said with the parenting stuff, Sean, because the two best things you can say as an adult to a child, or a parent especially, are saying, I'm sorry, because I agree with you. Parents don't apologize, especially to young kids. Yeah. And saying, I don't know, but I'll find out, when you actually don't know something, instead of trying to act like you know, because it's so powerful for kids to actually see that adults, especially ones like their parents, they don't know everything, and that, they actually did screw up, and they are showing you how to apologize, because then they learn, I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to have to do the same thing, and that's okay. So I really appreciate that, because I was a teacher for a while, and that's one of the things I always did as a teacher was, especially when I taught fourth grade in particular, the youngest ones, I always said if I didn't know something, right. I'd be like, I have to look it up, or I would apologize if I, might yell at a kid that was doing something that frustrated me that day. I would definitely apologize to that kid, and I would make sure the class knew, hey, I was definitely out of line that day. So doing that with kids is so important.
Huge. It's huge. And I think it's also like a really great, example. People always get really caught up in like, I can't believe people in power do horrible things. And I'm like, people at any level of power do horrible shit because we buy into it. Like, the whole thing of the parent is you buy into it either because you enjoy being the authority figure, or you're scared that everyone's going to find out that you are not the authority figure. Right? So like, when people, and that, I think even that simple level of parenting is an example of it, is that the moment you become a parent, you're like, I'm supposed to know everything. I'm also supposed to be the person in charge who lays out the rules and the punishments for them. So the moment a kid screws up, you're like, you're bad. And you're not thinking like, is my reaction good? Like, is this a suitable response? And if I let that response out, do I completely deflate any respect this child has for me? If I go, how angry I was back then? Like, Dad was wrong. Like, I should not have spoken to you that way. Or, as you said, which I disappoint my son constantly with, is the I don't know. Is just the level of like, what's the answer, Dad? And it's like, I actually don't know. Why don't you know? I'm just not smart enough on that topic. I'm not there. But I think we forget how hard it is to not want to have power when it's presented before us, and how scared we are of people finding out that we don't have any of that power. And I think a lot of bad things come out of both. I think they're both interconnected in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I think that's one of the themes that's less talked about in this book. We talk about the father son and all the what is good and can you still be good and all that stuff. But yeah, a lot of times we don't really talk about the power dynamics in the book. One of the people I wanted to ask you about, actually, one of the characters is the mom in the story. Speaking of power dynamics, because we're talking about the father and the son's relationship, and that definitely is the heart of the story. But what about the mom that's on the side? How did you go about that process of fitting her in the story and writing that?
I mean, she was just always there in my head. She's I would say an amalgamation of my mom who raised me after my dad left. And before he left, like, she just raised me, and my wife, in terms of like this, I mean, what I was shooting for with her was like this staunch strength, this very kind of like cut and dry look at the world. My mom is very much that way, of just like, you're not gonna shoot me. Like, it's one of my favorite scenes of like, I know who you are. Like, I can see who you are. I know who you are. You might hold a gun, but you're not. That's not who you are. I'd be scared of who you are. And my mom is very, you know, she for better or worse, always refers to herself as the truth teller in our family, and for better or worse, she is. And I also wanted, because I live it, the unabashed adoration between the son and the mom. Like my son just adores. You know, I get jealous sometimes. Like, just adores my wife so much. Like, you know, if she's gone for a couple of hours, like he's beside himself of where she is. And the moment she's in, he's like around her waist and just play with her all the time. She's his main playmate. You know, so a lot of these like quieter scenes that I think are easy to blow by is very much them. Like when the two of them are in the backyard and she's doing laundry and they start playing a game together. I watch that every day out my window when I'm working. So it was very much like how to have a strong female presence at this, within this, like, even though it's about a father and a son, like I knew I wanted the mom there. I also knew that something tragic was going to have to happen within that. Like that there had to be the forgiveness questions within this were going to have to be pushed really far. And that Mabel, the mother, would be really at the center of that.
I love just in stories like this that are very creative, very high concept, the ability to talk about very simple things. Like there was some scenes in the book that like where they go away to her mother's or something and he finds them. Yeah. You know, where it's like, wow, that part, him driving up in the car, getting out, like it's very eerie. You know, it's very eerie because I think that for a great many people, they have seen that scene before, even though they haven't seen that scene, you know. And there were, I always complimented Caitlin's artwork because there were just so many different emotions that I felt like were communicated in the characters and in their faces through all the different panels that really just took you for a ride on this one. And you know, I don't even know that I have a question, but that just really stuck. Just that scene, and there were other ones where just even though the scenario was very high concept, there are different things going on with the drug Bliss or with, you know, with these amphibian gods. It's still hit so close to home, you know. And I just say bravo on those. That's the way you did that.
Thanks. I mean, a lot of that in multiple ways is Caitlin. I mean, her artwork when it comes to faces and especially eyes is like unbelievable. Like she's able to do expression within the eyes that you literally like, I know what this person's thinking, which as a writer is amazing in comics. Cause I'm like, I'll write a ton of dialogue and then I'll see the art and I'm like, we don't need any of this. Like we know from the eyes, we know from the facial expression, what's happening here. So just let's cut my dialogue down to just the bare essence. And also she was really great in like the comics. Modern comics can be really hard in some ways because it's so rare to have something not be a mini series, just the economics of it and keeping runs going. There's so much new content for you guys to buy on a regular basis that it's like, do I keep reading issue 13 of this? Is like, and I think as creators, it also can sometimes push us in like a way of like, we got to keep it exciting at all moments, all the time. And that can hurt character. And Kate was really great at times that anytime she sniffed that out in the script, she'd be like, just write it like it's a scene in one of your plays. And I'd be like, all right, sure. And then I would just write a dialogue based scene. And she's also such a gifted artist that I could give her a dialogue. Like a great example of this is there's a scene in either issue 1 or 2 where Benton comes home late from doing one of his jobs and he's lying to his wife and she meets him on the stairs outside. And she's like, are you going to keep lying to me or are we going to talk for real?
Yeah.
And he's basically like, I'm going to keep lying to you. And okay. And like, it's just this, like, they know each other so well, and they sit down and start to drink, and they're just having a general conversation about like, how do we trust each other? Do we keep living the lie? What are we going to do? And they start talking about how they met, and Caitlin drew like them dancing at a barn, like they were looking out from the stoop, and suddenly the street becomes them dancing. And that became an amazing gift, because I was like, I can write the slowest, most character-based scene possible, and Caitlin is going to find a way to make it dynamic for the form. So that even though it's just two people telling a story about the past when they met at a barn dance, which even just saying out loud, it's like, that does not seem very exciting for the comic. She's going to be able to draw it in a way that we're suddenly like drawn even further in. And like, that's kind of the gifts that Kate really was able to give me on a regular basis. And also, just like I said, like sometimes reading the script, and especially as it got more and more personal, her kind of being like, I don't know the right word for it, like kind of being there to be like, it's okay, no one's gonna get bored. Because I think that is a level of like, when you start to feel like it's you're like, there's no way anyone's gonna give a shit about this. Like, this is me, this is boring. And Kate was really there to go like, no, when we talked on the phone, you were talking about the scene, and the way you described it is better than what you wrote. And I'm like, well, I wrote it with more action. She's like, it doesn't need the action. What would happen if you just wrote it the way we talked on the phone? And I'd be like, all right, and then I'd go back, right? And that became also really freeing, because it made me allowed to go like, I can just focus on the character. So by issue 3, I think Kate's kind of encouragement and really being this like sounding board to go like, you're not boring anyone. It's like, she just kept going like, it's my favorite thing that we've worked on. You're not boring me. Just keep doing it. And then, like I said, any points that I did think were slow, she would always shock me by being able to animate it in a way that I was like, I never saw that as how this would work, and it's so much better. Wow. So that's a good example, I think, of like how our partnership kind of has worked back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, that's an absolute testament to why comics aren't just one person's book, unless literally one person does every single part of it, letters, art, script, this and that. So that's awesome that she was able to do that, and I'm so grateful she did, because this wasn't boring. It worked. Like, it worked. It's a slam dunk for you. I think this is a book that's going to be talked about for quite a while. So I think you'll continue to be surprised at how much we all talk about it. And I don't know, I guess the last question I have, I guess it's kind of silly, but since the book is called Bliss, and a lot of it is about that drug and how it makes people forget bad things, do you ever think a drug like that could exist in reality? And if it did, what would that look like on the world?
I wouldn't be surprised if we're really close to it. Like,
yeah.
Well, just I think with the advancements that we keep seeing, I mean, it might not be the type of drug we ingest, but I wonder if there's levels of virtual reality that are going to be focused on that, of recreating memory or recreating event, right? So that you can erase certain things, do certain things, kind of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind-esque. Yeah. Because our advancements in that form seem to be so progressive. So like I could definitely see that. I think if it happens, it'll be a reaction to a society that is not always great at the gray stuff. Like, gray areas of life. For me, life is only gray.
So you mean how like everybody's very extreme, you're either this or that, kind of like what's happening lately?
Yeah. I think the very black and white, like people are good or people are evil response to the world currently. And I think also like I think there's a level of not a lack of forgiveness in society currently that I think could make something like that a retraining device. Like, if you're not going to forgive people, we're going to at least put them through this thing, and they're going to learn that they didn't do it, and it'll make them a better person. Or people suffering from great guilt. I think it's horrible. I think the crux of human beings is the fact that we can change. I think that's like the core thing that makes us what we are, is that like we can, and I've just seen it too many times. And that that we can change, but I think people also forget change is incredibly hard. And so it's this dichotomy, but I think like we're in a weird moment where I think there's so many people that are hurt and have been hurt for a very long time. And I don't mean this even just racially or across gender. I think as a whole, we have a whole society that's going like, my life is more fucked up than I thought. And people have been meaner to me in my life than I thought. I think it's across all lines. And I think that's gotten people to a point where they're like, this makes me think that humanity is awful and will never change, and people get off the hook and fuck them. Sorry for the language, but I do think it's a way that people respond, and I just don't want to live in that world, and I don't want my son to live in that world. Like I want to believe that people can work towards being. I think that all people not only have to work, like have to be able and allowed to work towards being better, but I actually think most of the people I know do. And I think that there's got to be something in that, because just because we're not seeing it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. You know, I worked a lot when I was doing theater in prisons, and I worked a lot at detention centers. And I also know through my own life and my own growth, like the person I am now is not the person I was in my 20s or my 30s. And I look back on that person, I'm like, what the fuck were you doing? like just so many mistakes, so much stupidity, so much like baseline day-to-day cruelty because I didn't feel okay with myself. Like not huge stuff, but just the little things you do, the little frenemy stuff you do, the thing you do in a relationship that you didn't know why you did it, and all of that stuff. And we all have it. Like, I think that's the thing that drives me the most insane is I'm like, we all have it. And yet there's this like weird conversation happening now where it's like, you're good or you're bad. And I'm like, I don't like that, because if I have to pick, I'm probably going to pick bad. I'm working towards good. I'm always working towards good. And so I don't know. Not to proselytize on it, but it's I think as a constantly back and forth Catholic, I wrestle back and forth between like believing, not believing, believing in the church, believing in God, not believing in either. Like, that stuff got ingrained in me as a kid, but it's something that the shame part of it I don't like, and the guilt part I don't like, even as important as guilt I think is. But the forgiveness thing, I just think can be so beautiful and necessary. I just don't know how you move on and grow if you don't have it. And just because someone asks for forgiveness doesn't mean you have to give it. It's a very complicated conversation. Because I think once you bring up like we need to have forgiveness, people are like, I don't need to forgive a murderer, I don't need to forgive a rapist, and it's like, no, you don't. You absolutely do not. But wiping away the concept of forgiveness or making people feel like they can't work towards it, I don't think that makes anything better.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that an 8-issue, limited series that you've done can open up conversations like this, like really just speaks to the work you're doing and something you're so passionate about that sounds like you want to be able to share with the world and help start conversations with. And the fact you can do it in comics and the medium, right? That you said, like, anybody could technically do it if you think about it, but no, like you and Caitlin have done something well. So it really resonates and shows.
Thanks. Yeah. And I mean, and it's also, I get worried too that it becomes like, well, I feel like too many writers often there's a level of like, well, this is what I see in society. This is what I see in me. And I think more writers need to be honest about that. Like, I think there's always this weird thing of like, I'm the seer of like all of our problems and ills, where it's more of me. I see in myself, like, how much more work do I have to do to make myself better? And what are the things I'm still trying to like work past? And like the end of the code is very much about like, how do you break the cycles?
Yeah.
And like, I think it's important also for people who read it. I hope they understand that too, is like, I am writing about me because I need to grow as much as I think anyone else needs to grow. I get worried it becomes I also think a part of our society becomes so much of that black and white people are good or bad. I think is too many people going, I'm the good person who sees all the bad, and I'm going to tell you how to be better.
Right.
When most of us are just living the struggle of that. And I think it's important to hear more people going, no, I fucked up, and this is how I'm dealing and being better.
Yeah.
Yeah. You made a great distinction there that, I'm not talking about like voicing, okay, I see it how it is, but I'm telling you what's inside me. And in doing so, you found that so many people connected with what you had to say. And that's, you know, the beautiful thing about art. And I was going to ask, because of the picture of Benton in the end, you know, if you had any kind of religious background or upbringing. So here and now the Catholic, because I mean, there's definitely a redemption, you know, Christ-likeness to Benton.
You know, I was assuming Catholic, but I didn't want to say anything. And then when you said it, Sean, I was like, there it is.
Yeah.
Not a bad way, but I was like, oh yes, guilt, forgiveness. Yeah,
sure. I'm first generation Irish Catholic.
Wow, the big one there.
Yeah. So grew up. My mom is from Dublin.
Wow.
So I grew up in the house with my mom and my grandparents and my uncles. Like when my mom got divorced, and my grandparents are hugely religious. My mom also religious. She used to bring me to a Christian. When I was very sick as a kid, my mom brought me to a Catholic faith healer. And then according to my mom, it all went away. I am much more doubter than that. Whenever I falter in her eyes, she'll bring up like, you should believe more than anyone, the Catholic faith healer.
Oh jeez. Oh jeez.
And I tend to roll. I tend to go very much back and forth between. I would say for the most part, like I tend to believe that there is a higher presence. I sometimes don't believe the higher presence likes us or cares about us.
Valid.
Go back and forth. You know, there's times where I believe in a more humble and beatific way, and there's times where I believe in a much more frustrated and angry way.
I was gonna say, it sounds like you need to come back to Mason's channel specifically to dive into all that. Like, my goodness, there's a lot to unpack there, and not in a bad way.
I will say this. I mean, I think there's tenets of it. Like, obviously, forgiveness is a huge Christian tenet and Catholic tenet that I don't think, no matter where I end up falling at my deathbed, will not be a part of me and what I believe in, like as a moral compass. Like most people, I feel like a lot of stuff gets, I mean, connected to our conversation, gets ruined when people get involved with it. Like,
yeah,
you know,
trying to do good, huh?
Yeah. I mean, my first comic book actually was a book called Saints that was basically like God walks away from heaven and a group of why is the word escaping me? Atheists. A group of atheists end up getting imbued with the powers of long lost saints. So they become like these so like Saints, if people know like Saint Sebastian, he was killed in a hail of arrows. In this book, he can pull arrows out of his skin and fire them. So he becomes like but it was another book that looked very much at like what I think about belief. I'm very fascinated by belief as well. Most of the other books I've written have to do with whether it's politically or religiously, why do people believe in things and what do they get from it?
Yeah. I think Bliss definitely still touches on that though, right? It's believing in morality and I would say it's still spiritual as heck, even if it's not a direct religion reference the entire time.
Yeah. I wouldn't call it a religious book, but I think
right.
This is the thing. Like anyone who's like, I get turned off by religion. It's like you live in what is still a puritanically based country. Like you've not escaped religion just by saying you don't believe in God. It's
right.
It's part of our legal system. It's part of our daily interaction. It's everywhere.
Yeah. It's part of the national anthem. It's part of this. It's part of that. Pledge of allegiance. Everything.
Not wanting to be too loud. My wife and I were talking about this. The argument of not being too loud in a public space, to me, is a completely puritanical idea. Is this idea of like you're supposed to be quiet and respectful of other people's space, and what volume is very much connected to those ideas.
So we have full permission to scream at everyone in every public place to get the Bliss trade paperback. We have full permission to just yell that and see what happens.
That sounds good to me.
I mean, that just sounds like a challenge you should do, is like just go on Twitter and hashtag Bliss challenge and be like, go to your comic shop and just yell at everybody to buy Bliss trade paperback and post the reactions.
So many retailers would be angry at me.
Well, I love it, Sean. I mean, I think that I find spiritual, religious, ideas and imagery in all kinds of comic books. Otherwise, my channel probably wouldn't exist. And certainly just the simple concept of, the scriptural concept of there's no greater love than this, than somebody lay their life down, for another. And it was really beautiful in the story how even though, what Benton ends up doing and kind of his dive and stuff, it was about they needed him to be responsible. They needed somebody to direct their hate at. And as controversial and as gray as he may have been, he worked towards something better. And he worked towards that bliss that was the concept, the heart of this story, I feel like. And so it was, very well done. I think I told Lauren, I think before you came on, that I believe that there are artists have certain stories where you can tell that it's really rooted inside of them because of just how it connects with people. And I really feel like this was one of those for you. We love the work. So, just in conclusion, just wanted to say excellent job to you and the whole team, to Kate, to Luis, to anybody involved. And Bliss in trade is available. So please go pick it up at, I think it was like $20. It's a steal, 8-issue series that is look, we've been talking about it for an hour and we could go on.
We could probably go on another 3 hours. Let's be real. And, if you want to go just tell people how happy you are running down the street while you carry the trade, do that. Hashtag Bliss challenge. Just go
fight
for
the
it.
tyranny of silence.
There you go. We will not be silenced.
I appreciate it. I also want to give one last shout out to our Ari Pluchinski, who did the colors for the last 3 issues of Bliss, who was amazing and jumped in at the last second and did a seamless job where I don't think anyone even noticed that.
I was going to say, I didn't notice a huge difference in the coloring. So the fact that I didn't even know, I think that there's a different colorist, because at that point I just turned the page of the credits because I was like, I got to read what's happening.
But I just want to make sure to give Ari credit because she was amazing.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Is there anybody else you want to shout out or anything you wanted to say last second?
No, this is great. I'm excited to be part of your first crossover. I hope there's your multiverse events.
Hey, one last thing that I forgot to mention is when I looked online, it said Bliss Volume 1. And so I hope that that's because there's more, whether it be a year from now or 5 years from now. I want more Bliss.
I
don't we all, Mason?
I can't promise that. There definitely has not been plans for that. I do hope to work with Caitlin again, but we'll see. We both have become suddenly very, very busy. But she's become
for good reason. Yeah.
But yeah, if there is, I will let you know first.
I was gonna say the price of success means you gotta wait on other things, unfortunately.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for having me tonight, guys.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Cool.
Yeah, make sure, guys. Sean Lewis is on Twitter. You can find him there. Are you on Instagram too, Sean? I don't know if I follow you.
I'm still gonna probably not be on anything, but I am on Twitter.
Well, as long as Sean is on Twitter, you can find him there. Caitlin's on there as well. I'm on the House of Nerd show, so I'm on Twitter there. I'm also on Twitter at friendly MBHD by, I think. Mason, where can we find you again?
You can find me on the Twitters and Instagram and YouTube. Look up Comics and Crosses. You'll find me having great conversations like this, talking about the eternal truths behind our modern mythology, is the way I would put it.
Nice.
And
it's so fancy. It's. I feel like that should become as legendary as like the SVU theme song.
Yeah. One can only hope. We're working on it. Yeah, so thanks again to Sean. Thanks to my good friend Lauren. And yeah, people, we out. Go get that trade. Go get Bliss. Buy it for a friend. Perfect Christmas present.